to my channel. My name is Shannon. So before I start, I just want to say thank you to all of my new subscribers. Last time I checked, I was at 125, which I know probably doesn't sound like a lot to some people, but like when I first started uploading videos, I would get like a new subscriber like maybe once a week, and now I'm getting new subscribers every day, and I'm having like some really great conversations with people in the comment section. My last few videos have been topics that like I was really interested in. Like it was really fun for me to talk about it and like to have people interact with me and share their thoughts. Like every time I get a new comment or a new subscriber, it's like Christmas morning, and I really appreciate that. I just want you guys to know that. Anyway, if you haven't already subscribed to this channel and you like this video, and you like my content, then please hit subscribe and like this video. And if the spirit so moves you, share it on your social media. I bet your friends will love it. I'm going to do something that's kind of like a no-no for this video, which is I'm going to be reading from a teleprompter, or an app, teleprompter app on my phone, which I know is like a big no-no for YouTube, but this is like a very like sensitive topic, and it's going to be a long video. I've tried doing previous takes of this video without the teleprompter, and like I find that I forget things, and I just don't, and I feel like things can come across a bit more offensive or not as clear if I miss certain details. So with that being said, I'll get started. Thanks for stopping by my channel. If you don't know me yet, my name's... I'm just kidding, I'm not gonna read like that. Hello, this is Shannon coming to you from the future to let you know I was editing and I realized that there were parts of the video where the camera cut off. I didn't immediately realize it, so like there were parts of my argument that were missing. Luckily, I did multiple takes, so I was able to find them, that part of the argument in other videos. So it's gonna look a little bit weird because I'm gonna insert clips from previous takes occasionally, I think only twice, so just a warning. Anyway, enjoy the video. Now, because I know you clicked on this video for a reason, I'll stop wasting your time and I'll get started with the topic at hand. The truth about what we in our culture refer to as trans women. We're called different things in different cultures. For instance, we're referred to as lady boys in places like Thailand. We're called travestis in Brazil. Mexico has a third gender category called muxes, M-U-X-E-S. In India, there's hijras. This term typically denotes some sort of like socially recognized like third gender category that's composed of feminized males who we would, in our culture in the U.S., recognize, we would recognize them as either like trans women or perhaps like very feminine gay males, like who might fall into some sort of like non-binary category, but it's essentially the same thing. It's the point. I find that different cultures just have like a different way of rationalizing various natural human phenomena. In any case, what is a trans woman? Some people think that we are women trapped in men's bodies. Some people think that we are mentally ill men, that we're delusional or even perverts. Well, I know I'm biased for obvious reasons. I'm a tranny! But I stand by my opinion that all of those people are wrong. Wrong, I say. The first thing we need to establish is that the transgender phenomenon isn't something new. It's not a product of some recent societal moral collapse. It's not even like an invention of crazy social justice warrior college students. Though I will grant you, they do for some reason seem to take it upon themselves to try to speak for trans women more than most people. But that doesn't matter. The truth is that the trans phenomenon has existed prominently enough to be consistently documented over centuries in societies around the world. What's more, there's already a pretty convincing, well-founded, but unfortunately not very well-known explanation for why this phenomenon exists in the first place. That's right, this is the part of the video where I once again talk about Dr. Ray Blanchard and the whole Hsts and AGP theory about transsexualism. If you need me to catch you up to speed, here's the deal. There's a sexologist. Yes, that's a real field. That's a real field of study. There's a sexologist named Ray Blanchard who believes that trans women fall into one of only two categories: homosexual transsexuals, which are effeminate gay men who want to be girls because they have too many female typical interests to feel completely content as men or to fit in with men, and autogynephilic or non-homosexual men who have an erotic and romantic fascination with the fantasy of becoming what they are attracted to, becoming women. I've mentioned this theory enough in my videos that I figured it was finally time I do a deep dive into the topic, as well as why I believe Blanchard's theory is correct, or at least mostly correct. His theory is extremely controversial, and some people believe it's not just wrong, but also transphobic. And we can talk about that, accusation, but it's important to know that, like, say if you were to build like a time machine and go back to like 1910 when people were first studying transsexuals, first becoming familiar with the phenomenon, over the next few decades, if you were to explain to any clinician or any researcher familiar with trans people, Blanchard's theory that there are these two types of transsexuals, they probably would respond with something to the effect of, no shit, Captain Obvious. I mean, for decades, clinicians frequently observed that men who reported that they wanted to be women usually turned out to be either very feminine homosexual men or unremarkably masculine straight men who reported a history of experiencing erotic pleasure from cross-dressing. Even if there were at least a few inexplicable outliers who didn't seem to fall into either group, the fact remained that there were these two patterns that could so often be seen among patients with cross-gender identity, and researchers recognized the significance of that. It does seem like researchers had some trouble making sense of this at first. In the early 20th century, a German physician and sex researcher named Magnus Hirschfeld documented what he believed were multiple subtypes of male to female transsexuals, categorizing them according to sexual orientation. So heterosexual, bisexual, homosexual, and what some people call asexual, although the technically correct term is apparently analo-erotic, A-N-A-L-L-O-E-R-O-T-I-C. Decades later, Dr. Ray Blanchard's contribution, among others, was recognizing that heterosexual, bisexual, and asexual males with gender dysphoria all have the same underlying condition, which he termed autogynephilia, which literally means love of oneself as a woman. He recognized, and this is where things get controversial, he recognized that homosexual gender dysphoria and non-homosexual gender dysphoria are two completely different things. They have two completely different etiologies. Homosexual transsexuals, he uses the term homosexual in relation to our birth sex, not our gender identity. Homosexual transsexuals are on the same etiological spectrum as gay men. This is why the T absolutely belongs in the LGBTQ acronym, no matter what you might hear from some people who are either politically motivated or just don't know what the heck they're talking about. Side note, I do think there are some gay men who feel ashamed of their own femininity and of the femininity of other homosexuals, and so they try to distance themselves from transgender people by saying that the T doesn't belong in the acronym, but truthfully, we're on the same spectrum here. But for non-homosexual transsexuals, they're on the same etiological spectrum as cisgender straight men with cross-dressing fetishes. That does not mean that they are the same, because there's a lot more to it than just that. But they do have the same underlying autogynephilic sexual orientation. I have hair in my mouth. For some of them, their orientation might manifest as a simple cross-dressing fetish, but for others, it develops into severe gender dysphoria that can only be reconciled through transitioning. For what it's worth, I've heard several different autogynephilic transsexuals state plainly that before they transitioned, they thought or tried to convince themselves that they were just a cross-dresser and not really trans. So I'm personally convinced that there is a strong link between autogynephilic cross-dressers and non-homosexual gender dysphoria. Like I said before, there's a lot of controversy around the theory of autogynephilia. Specifically, some trans activists absolutely despise this theory and anyone who believes in it. They prefer to promote the common narrative that all male to female transsexuals are simply real women trapped in men's bodies. They promote the idea that all trans people are trans because of the same reason, because they have gender dysphoria, and that gender dysphoria is caused by being in the wrong body and nothing else. If you press them on the issue, they may argue that it has something to do with having a female brain or something or another. But the studies they cite don't actually say what they want you to believe that those studies say. The truth is, studies have been conducted that show that homosexual transsexuals and feminine gay males have some brain structures that are similar to genetic females, but that study does not replicate for non-homosexual transsexuals. But that's a topic for another video. Anyway, people who support Dr. Ray Blanchard's theory, including myself, believe that AGP trans people, who interestingly make up the majority of trans activists and even the majority of male to female transitions in the Western world, they prefer this born in the wrong body narrative because they have a deep psychological and psychosexual need to believe that they are women. Interestingly, homosexual transsexuals are far more likely to say that we don't think of ourselves as being the same as natural-born women, but that's not the case for a lot of AGP. They experience a form of gender dysphoria that is rooted in experiencing sexual and emotional fulfillment from the thought of themselves as women. So I think that's just obviously the case that when that fantasy becomes so strong that they feel the need to transition, it usually means that they've now developed a heightened need to be seen as real women by society in order to feel validated and emotionally fulfilled. Any suggestion that they are not real women inside, that they are actually men with autogynephilic sexuality, just won't do, because that interferes with the emotional fulfillment that they are trying to achieve by being recognized as women. I also think that people are just generally uncomfortable with others knowing too much about their sexuality. I think that most people like to put out an image of being essentially just like everyone else, like of fitting in, that they fit in with what society deems acceptable, and like any indication, any sense that others perceive them as not fitting in, of having a sexuality that is not as acceptable, leads to like people feeling a lot of shame. So being seen as having a very non-normative and like very stigmatized sexual orientation, such as autogynephilia, which involves engaging in activities that society associates with things that are already stigmatized, such as homosexuality and male effeminacy, that can cause a great deal of shame. I believe that AGP activists are trying to protect themselves and other AGP transsexuals who can individually be seen as being representative of all non-homosexual transsexuals by the people in their lives. They're trying to protect them from that shame by denying the prevalence of autogynephilia altogether. In their efforts to deny the existence of autogynephilia, AGP activists often co-opt the narratives of homosexual transsexuals. Here's a description of the early childhood symptoms that HSTS characteristically present, according to Ray Blanchard and the other clinicians who contributed writing to his book, Clinical Management of Gender Identity Disorders in Children and Adults. According to their clinical observations, HSTS typically fit the following profile. As boys, they are unusually deficient in or afraid of physical competitiveness. They avoid rough and tumble play, are afraid of fistfights, and they strongly dislike team sports. They prefer to play with girls, to play girls' games, and to play with girls' toys, in particular Barbie-type dolls. They also prefer the company of adult women to that of adult men, and they like to take part in women's conversations. They often become mother's helpers, and they take an unusual interest in domestic pursuits such as cooking, sewing, and decorating. Why did I just do that? They are keenly interested in women's clothes, hairstyles, and makeup. Many entertain themselves by drawing pictures of glamorous women. I swear to God, I did that. But drawing pictures of glamorous women, those whose mothers will allow it, like to pick out their mother's dresses and brush their hair and make up their faces. Even when they are like not engaging in any obvious cross-gender behavior, these boys are observably effeminate. This may manifest itself in feminine speech patterns, gestures, or a gait. As these children reach middle or late childhood, their schoolmates begin to notice the subtle as well as the obvious signs of femininity and respond by labeling them sissies. The chapter goes on to note that the most strongly gender dysphoric individuals, the homosexual transsexuals, eventually attempt to establish themselves in society as females. It has also been noted, though, by Blanchard and other researchers that social factors play a huge role in motivating effeminate boys to transition. It can generally just make our lives a lot easier if we can pass socially as women. So basically, homosexual transsexualism is, as Rod Fleming sometimes puts it, the most extreme manifestation of homosexuality. Male to female homosexual transsexuals are on the same ideological spectrum as gay men, drag queens, and Beyonce's bathtub dancers. Female to male transsexuals are on the same ideological spectrum as butch lesbians or studs and Ellen DeGeneres, although they're usually a little bit nicer. The unifying quality of people in this ideological spectrum is that we all have some amount of cross-gender identity, which includes being attracted to members of the same biological sex. In other words, because we identify with the opposite biological sex, we end up being attracted to the same kinds of people that the members of the sex we identify with are most typically attracted to. Does that make sense? Am I making sense? Let me know if I'm not making any sense. Anyway, this description is what most people think of when they think of male to female transsexuals, so it makes sense to them that people who fit this profile might want to dress and live as women. So understandably, this is the narrative that AGP transsexuals try to co-opt in order to explain what would otherwise be inexplicable. The fact that they, as unremarkably masculine men, nevertheless want to dress and live as women. It makes no sense to most people why straight men would want to do this, and many people are hostile to the idea of accepting them as women because they have always seemed so much like men. Often, AGP transsexuals will try to account for this by retroactively searching for any signs of effeminacy during their childhood, such as crying more often or being more sensitive than other boys, or supposedly feeling dissatisfied with some aspect of the social expectations for males, or perhaps even, they may recall an incident where they enjoyed playing with a girl's toy like a Barbie doll. They sometimes assert that they hid their femininity, but the truth is that boys who are truly feminine cannot hide it and don't even attempt to hide it until they're old enough to recognize that their effeminacy isn't socially accepted. And even then, they can't actually hide it. Kids still notice and still pick on them. That's certainly what happened to me. Whenever AGP transsexuals describe their childhoods, they tend to describe some sort of internal battle, an internal incongruence of some sort that no one around them noticed or was aware of. Contrarily, HSTS tend to give very vivid descriptions of exhibiting blatantly girly mannerisms and behavioral patterns, and of not fitting in and being ostracized because we were gender non-conforming. The unvarnished truth here is that AGPs are not innately feminine the way that HSTS are. If you're interested, here's the description given in the same book that I read to you from earlier, Clinical Management of Gender Identity Disorders in Children and Adults. This is the description of male children who show signs of AGP, or what they call transvestism. The term transvestite was coined by Magnus Hirschfeld in like 1910 to refer to any transsexual, but the term eventually came to be associated with AGP and with people who were cross-dressers, and this book was published in 1990, so the term transvestite apparently wasn't considered as offensive back then, I guess. Anyway, here's what the book says about AGP during childhood. Many adult transvestites, adult AGP is what they mean, report that they began cross-dressing before puberty. In our research with adolescent boys referred for transvestite behavior, we have found that about 50% recall a childhood onset of the cross-dressing. Our data suggests that the form of cross-dressing differs sharply from that observed in children with gender identity disorder of childhood. So HSTS. It typically involves the use of undergarments rather than outerwear, particularly soft, silky articles and nylon stockings. Moreover, other signs of cross-gender identification are not found, such as cross-sex peer, toy, or role preferences, and the appearance and behavior of these boys is unremarkably masculine. Some parents of our adolescent transvestites had noted early on that penile erection accompanied their child's cross-dressing or manual stroking of garments. The more common function of the cross-dressing, however, seems to be some type of self-soothing. These phenomena are not observed in children with gender identity disorder of childhood, HSTS, who typically use outer clothing to enhance cross-gender identification. So there you have it, hun. While HSTS children show clear signs of having a mistaken sense of belonging to the opposite sex, AGP children tend to have a psychosexual fixation with women and women's undergarments. Their early experiences of cross-dressing tend to be them trying on women's undergarments in secret, and usually after puberty they have at least a few episodes of trying on female lingerie and masturbating to the image of themselves in the mirror. So clearly they have a sexual inclination towards cross-dressing, and that just is what it is. That's what makes the theory of autobiographical transsexualism controversial. That's why AGP activists try to assist the public in conflating HSTS with AGP transsexuals. This works from some outside observers, but I think that most people can tell the difference, at least on like some subconscious level. The truth is that HSTS are usually easily distinguishable from non-homosexual transsexuals by appearance alone. While there are exceptions to the rule, HSTS tend to look something like this, and AGP are more likely to look something like this. You know, the fact that HSTS, as kids, we were always fixated on glamour and fashion, even that translates into adulthood, so that paired with the fact that we are strongly attracted to heterosexual men, or men who are very like typically masculine, that's our underlying psychosexual motivation, that leads us to try to make ourselves appear as like glamorous and beautiful as possible. We tend to be very good at makeup, we tend to wear wigs or extensions if our natural hair isn't sufficiently glamorous or snatched, as the kids say now. And I noticed that we tend to adopt more of whatever the like popular female fashion trends of our day are. This usually isn't the case for AGPs or non-homosexual transsexuals, who I've noticed are less good at makeup. They wear much less of it. They aren't as interested in fashion trends. They usually attempt to make do with their own natural hair rather than wear a wig. And if they do wear wigs, they often are not as skillful at selecting good ones. I swear I'm not trying to like rag on AGPs. I think they really are more like lesbians, and as we have already established, lesbians, at least the more masculine ones, are on the same spectrum as female to male transsexuals and are thus less likely to be interested in girly things like fashion. But let's get to the bottom line of this video. Why am I talking about the distinction between male to female transsexuals? It's so divisive. Why is this distinction important? You know, I get comments on my videos where people say, you know, labels aren't important, we should stop trying to put people into different boxes and so forth and so on. And I agree with that to a certain extent. But I think the important thing here is that a lot of people just don't get the whole trans thing. There's a lot of stigma and backlash. People see cases of people like Caitlyn Jenner, who was a very masculine and award-winning Olympic athlete, and they think this person must be mentally ill. People are freaking beside themselves because they don't get how a man like Bruce Jenner could really be a woman on the inside. They don't understand that he has a unique and perfectly harmless and okay sexual orientation. They listen to someone like Caitlyn insist that they were always a woman on the inside, and they think that doesn't make any damn sense. And when they see any male to female transsexual, they think Caitlyn Jenner's story seems so bogus to me. Surely every trans woman is just as nonsensical. Perhaps if those people understood what autogynephilia is and what it means, they could more easily accept Caitlyn, and they could figure out how to accept homosexual transsexuals for who we are and autogynephilic transsexuals for who they are. I understand why the trans community and trans activists are apprehensive to talk about the Hsts and AGP dichotomy. A lot of people aren't going to be accepting of autogynephilia, and that just is what it is. It's also common for people like gender-critical feminists, who are sometimes referred to as TERFs, to attempt to weaponize AGP theory to try to make trans women out to be perverts. They twist the theory and try to make it seem like it's just a fetish, which isn't the case. AGP has a psychosexual root, and but it's a progressive disorder where the sexual aspect declines greatly over time, but the gender dysphoria increases significantly over time until the person feels a great deal of anguish and depression from the awareness of their male body. And the best thing for those people to do really is to transition. There are still people who will point to just like the sexual aspect, unfortunately, and try to make it seem like something different than it was, which is why I think it's so important that we level with people. I think if trans women want people to accept this, we can't lie to them. We can't patronize them by trying to feed them a narrative that they know doesn't make logical sense. What tends to happen is people will seek out an answer that makes more sense to them, and they'll usually get the answer from someone like Ben Shapiro, who thinks that trans people are crazy. I think if we level with people and we really explain who we are and what all this stuff means, that will allow people to start dealing with it. You know, back in like the 1950s, everyone wanted to believe that life should be like a Leave It to Beaver episode, that everyone should fit into like this wholesome cookie cutter box. It would be nice if they were right, but they weren't. People are way more complicated than that. Sexuality is way more complicated than that. So people need to get past trying to pretend trans people fall into some wholesome cookie cutter box. Two, first step, I believe, to getting past all this stuff is to simply tell the truth. So I get why like leftist trans people on YouTube don't want to talk about this. But I was a little surprised at first to see that like people who are more like right or like center right or classical liberal types of trans people, like Rose of Dawn and Blair White, I expected them to have talked more about this by now. I've heard them occasionally mention it, but they're usually like downplaying it and not going into detail about giving a description of what these things, what AGP is, what HSTS is, and so forth and so on. And I think it's because they have their own version of what's called feminine essence theory, born in the wrong body. Trans people are just women born in the wrong body. Okay, so I think that people like ContraPoints, who's a trans YouTuber, I think ContraPoints is AGP, and I'm actually going to make a video responding to her autogynephilia video at some point. I think she's AGP, and so she is motivated, like many AGP activists, I think she's motivated with just trying to like rescue herself from her own shame about her autogynephilia. Whereas I think that people like Blair White and Rose of Dawn, who, if I'm not mistaken, are both HSTS, I think they are they like employ what's called like the trans medicalist point of view, which states that you have to have gender dysphoria to be trans, or yada yada yada. I think what they're really saying, once you're familiar with HSTS and AGP theory, I think that they're trying to say that HSTS are the good ones and AGP are the bad ones, the ones that are like, AGP tend to like not pass as well and can be more easily dismissed as being like transgenders or what have you. So if that's really what their motivation is, then I think that's wrong too. I think that society needs to learn how to accept people for who they are, whether you're HSTS, AGP, no matter what your particular deal is. Every human being has some sort of psychosexual motivation. We're able to accept like heterosexual men whose psychosexual motivation is to have sex with as many women as possible. That doesn't make them bad people. Neither does having some sort of like inverted sexuality that makes you want to become what you're attracted to, which is AGP. I don't think that's any better or worse than any other sexual orientation. And I think society has to learn how to accept people for who they are, not for who people try to present themselves as to make people more comfortable. Anyway, there's my 2 cents on this topic. I guess I'll see you guys in the next video. Don't forget to subscribe and share this video if you think your friends will like it. And I'll see y'all in the next video. Bye.